Welcome to the vCenter Server Performance Optimization module. In this module, it is important to understand how vCenter's performance is also critical, just like the ESXi servers. Data centers, of course, rely on vCenter Server for healthy operation. We can make the data center run more efficiently and smoothly using the latest improvements to vCenter performance and scalability. So, in this lesson, we're here to talk about the vCenter components and services, the factors that influence vCenter Server's performance, and the vCenter Server's appliance tools that we have available to monitor for the vCenter resources usage. So just like all the ESX servers resources such as CPU, memory, storage, networking, we need to consider all those for vCenter as well, including the vCenter database. So here we are taking a look at those considerations, right? The key factors in monitoring and maintaining acceptable levels of performance of vCenter and all of its services. We need to be looking at CPU and memory. We'll need to be looking at the network and storage and database. Also, user interface. So for optimal CPU performance, ideally you want your vCenter server to be at, don't let it sustain at 70% or higher CPU utilization. Sure, it can spike. There's going to be time to time transient workload spikes that are going to cause, the CPU to, have high utilizations from time to time, especially when it's doing things like database rollups and stuff, more so than say the previous Windows vCenter, where the database was actually on another system typically, and you would offload some of those database rollups. With the vCenter embedded with the database on the same box, then rollups are going to be something that are going to happen on the box. But if it's sustaining at 70%, then that's more of an issue. Now, the good news is that the vCenter appliance actually has been configured for hot pluggable CPU and hot pluggable memory, so you can add virtual resources pretty easily even without rebooting the vCenter system. So if you're finding that the vCenter server is excessively or exceeding 70% excessively, then it's probably going to need more CPU, right? Identify the system service that's consuming all the CPU. If it's the VPXD service, right, the vCenter service that is consuming most of the CPU, then it's probably time to consider adding more virtual CPUs. Certainly when you install or deploy the vCenter appliance, you are setting up an initial size, right? Is it small? Is it medium? Is it large? And so on. And if you ended up adding more inventory after this, you can very easily readjust your vCenter server's settings. Now, you could also add another vCenter server, right? Just to distribute the load across multiple vCenter instances. But of course, that's another vCenter license. That's not, something that you're going to use for free. If it's a Java service that's consuming most of the CPUs, that's the vSphere client service, then you might want to increase the heap memory on that size for the service. So just check to see what's using all the CPU. If it's a Java service, then maybe it just needs a larger heap size. Also, look at the plugins, the extensions, right? NSX uses what's called the extension agent manager. So there may be plugins, there may be custom API code that communicates with vCenter. You may need to increase resources to handle those extensions too. Now, when it comes to memory performance, it actually is kind of similar. You might find that memory will spike over 70% from time to time, but what you don't want is to be sustained at 70% constantly, right? Check to see, is the vCenter server swapping? Because if it's paging its memory, that's a sure sign that it is insufficiently configured for memory. You're obviously going to need to think about giving the vCenter VM more memory. But verify which services have high CPU usage as well, because if it's high CPU usage, might indicate that there is excessive swapping due to all the restrictions in memory. So more memory might be added. It might need to be added to mitigate this issue. Of course, if memory is overcommitted in your cluster, considering setting reservations for the vCenter server appliance. So where is that vCenter VM running? Is the vCenter VM running in a cluster that itself is having saturation for memory issues? Having low memory resources on a host could cause the ESX server that the VM is running in, the vCenter VM is running in, to cause the host swapping. So we want to make sure that's not happening as well. Now, how do you tell about memory and CPU metrics? Well, you can actually look inside the vCenter server management, otherwise known as the VAMI, right? You log into the vCenter server on port 5480. What you'll do is you'll select the monitor selection there, and you'll see under CPU and memory, the CPU metrics and the memory metrics. You can hover over either one of those lines and get an actual point in the value of that point, right? We see here that memory usage is high. It appears the CPU usage is pretty high as well. You also have different intervals too, right? This is showing you for the past hour. If it's been like that for a couple days, that's not a good sign, right? That's a clear indicator that for both of these resources, this vCenter server, we might want to look into giving that vCenter a little bit more resources. Another way of looking at resources is using something called vimtop. This is on the vCenter server's command line. You can gain access to this by simply running SSH over to your vCenter server. You can access this from both the appliance shell or from the bash shell. This is from the bash shell. As you can see, the administrator here logged into the vCenter server and immediately was in the appliance shell because that's the default shell. And you can actually type vimtop right there. It'll open up in that shell. But if you were to type in the shell command, which sends you over to the bash shell, vimtop, of course, works here as well. It's basically a vCenter-like tool that is it's a vCenter tool that's mimicking the ESXtop tool. It's got an overall vCenter server system resource overview. It's got CPU metrics. It's got memory metrics. We see here this vCenter server has 12 gigs of memory, and it looks like it's used 10 gigs, so that pretty closely matches to what we saw in the picture, isn't it? Right? A lot of its memory is being used. For the CPUs, they definitely look pretty busy here. Now, the way how vimtop works, it actually shows only a couple processors. Your vCenter server might have quite a few processors. It's only going to show you the top 2 or 3. So don't be surprised when you see not a whole lot of CPUs in the list. And then below the line here, we're looking at the processes, the services running inside our vCenter server. So you can get a quick breakdown on the CPU usage and their memory usage on a per service basis. So this is a quite useful utility. If you'd rather use this tool as opposed to the VAMI, that is your choice. They actually offer very similar reports. This is real-time only though, where the VAMI does give you a little longer time period. If you want to customize any of the output, by the way, all you have to do is in vimtop, hit the letter C to adjust the columns. Easy name to remember here, right? So here we are in the processes view, and we are expanding or adjusting which columns we would like to add to the processes view, right? To go back to the processes view, hit the letter R, right? So this is actually a little bit different than ESXtop in that the letters don't always match to anything, right? So this is the processes view. That's the letter R. Will take you to the processes view. To see the disks view, that's the letter K. And then to see the networking, right? The networking view is with the letter O. So you have R, K, O are your resource options here in this tool. But yes, you see all the services and you can see the resources, CPU breakdown, and their memory usage on a per service basis. So, hence we just talked about these things. What, as a general guideline, we should keep CPU memory use by a vCenter instance below what percentage? So, as a general guideline, we should keep the CPU and memory below 70%, right? It spikes over that, that's fine. If it's sustained over those, now we need to look and see what's going on with that vCenter system. So that was our first look. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back and take a look at other resource usage metrics available on our vCenter system. So we'll see you in a few minutes.